For real engagement.
Get an insider's view of the court and hear from all the justices about its role, traditions, and history. The Supreme Court, home to America's highest court, premieres Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN. And for a behind-the-scenes sneak peek, connect to C-SPAN through Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.
Washington Journal continues.
Well, on your screen now is Republican Senator Johnny Isakson, who is a member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which voted out their own health care bill. But the Senate Finance Committee, Senator, finished their work last night. What's your reaction to what they finished up? They haven't voted on a final product yet, but let's say they, as is, would you support it?
I would not as is for a number of reasons. I've got to complete the study of it, but I'm troubled by the $1,900 assessment against people who don't buy insurance automatically. I'm most troubled by the 133% of poverty coverage level for Medicaid, primarily because of what it does to my state and the other 49 states. It's about a $40 billion problem. That is a huge burden to put on the states at a time when their budgets are already stretched to the limit.
How much different is the current, how the Senate Finance bill finished up to what the Help Committee came up with?
Well, interestingly enough, the Health Committee bill was strictly policy. The Finance Committee bill is the finance mechanism to pay for it. So those are going to be merged together into one bill. I understand it's going to take about a week to actually write the legislative language from the conceptual bill that the Finance Committee is going to pass out. Then that will be married with the Help Committee bill on the floor to be one health care bill.
And when do you see that? How do you see that process playing out, and when?
I don't see how we start on it any earlier than 10 days, but it could be as early as the 13th of October.
Our guest is Johnny Isakson, Republican Senator from Georgia. The numbers are on the screen. Go ahead and dial in to continue our conversation on public policy issues this morning on the Washington Journal. Senator, I also wanted to ask you about Afghanistan strategy. There was a story in the front page of the Washington Post this morning about the Obama administration and perhaps a narrower look at Afghanistan and not more troops.
Well, I'm concerned. I put a lot of stock in what the people that are the commanders on the ground tell us they need. I think General Petraeus demonstrated in Iraq with his counterinsurgency strategy and the surge that if you pay attention to what the commanders say they need to accomplish the mission, then that's what you really ought to fund and that's what you really ought to finance. I think the mission, as far as I know, without a change, has been to confront al-Qaeda and the Taliban, eradicate al-Qaeda and their sanctuary on the border with Pakistan, and to render the Taliban neutral. Any wait and see or any stay as it is type of thing on troops right now, I think stretches that goal because we have not been able to reduce the Taliban. They've in fact tripled since March when we sent 19,000 more troops in. So I think General McChrystal's request for more troops is a justified request that would have to be rejected only on sound facts or a change in the mission.
Senate Nix's GOP bid to have generals testify. Did you vote along with Senator McCain to have General McChrystal et al.?
I did. I attended General Jones's briefing, which was a secure briefing the night before. Realized there's enough information I think I needed from the generals on the ground to where I think it's absolutely essential that the Senate and the House be able to hear the testimony of our commanders before a decision's made.
And finally, I want to get your reaction to the new unemployment number. Unemployment rate at 9.8% as employers cut 263,000 jobs.
Our economy is still in trouble. There are a lot of indicators that have shown that. State revenues from taxes were down to the lowest level since I think 1960 in one report here recently. Our federal revenues have been going down from taxes because there's not as much economic activity, not as much capital gain, not as much vibrance in the economy. We've got a ways to go. I listened to the Commerce Secretary earlier before I came on. I think a lot of things he talked about are justified, but the one thing we need to do is empower the private sector because in the end, the engine of America is not its government, it's free enterprise in the private sector.
What's the unemployment rate in Georgia?
10.3 or 4.
Why is it higher than the national average? What's going on?
Well, a couple areas. One, Atlanta has been a huge construction and growth area and development area, number one. Second, because of the decline in home sales, Dalton, Georgia, where 85% of all the carpet in America is made, is completely shut down because nobody's buying carpet for houses or things like that. So we've had a dramatic impact in the construction and construction-related industries.
Johnny Isakson is our guest. First call for him comes on our Democrats line. Joanne in Kingsport, Tennessee.
Yes, I'd like.
Joanne, we're listening.
Okay, I was watching with the voice down. I couldn't. I thought you weren't talking. What it is, I mean, I don't have anything to ask about the, for us the jobless stuff because I'm in my 80s and I do not, I'm not able to get out and work anyway. But the thing about it is, I wonder why each president that has been in, maybe twice within their term, they give us on Social Security a little measly raise, which we appreciate. But if you live on less than $15,000 a year, still paying for your home and all of your bills, how do they expect us to live from time to time?
Well, I know it's very difficult, and I know on Social Security this year there is no cost of living increase because the cost of living actually dropped by 4% in the last year. The good news is Social Security is not being lowered, but it's not being raised. I fully understand. I have a 93 and a 95-year-old mother and father-in-law. I understand on the pressure of those who are living on Social Security and a fixed income, which is another reason why we need a vibrant economy to come back, because with it, there'll be COLAs again on Social Security, and there'll be in full employment and less pressure on government and less pressure on taxation.
Senator, we've received a tweet here from Dr. Dunk 1220. By doing nothing on health care, we are paying a tax through higher insurance premiums and costs. Getting everyone insured will benefit all.
Well, doing nothing on health care is unacceptable. I haven't heard anybody in the Congress, Republican or Democrat, say doing nothing is important. What's important is doing the right thing. In terms of the uninsured in America, the some 46 million that's the estimated number, we know that a part of those people are folks who are eligible for Medicare and Medicaid who aren't enrolled for one reason or another. The very first thing we ought to do is seeing to it the government is enrolling those in programs they're eligible for. Secondly, we need to allow people who are independent contractors, of which there are many, some 17 million in the country, to be able to form together to form competitive risk pools across state lines so that they can buy in a competitive market like ERISA-covered plans do in major corporations. Those two moves alone would make between 50 and 60% of the people who are currently not covered eligible for coverage that they could buy. Those are two good starts, and if we start in a step-by-step process, we can close the number of uninsured and lessen the pressure on those who are paying premiums.
Martinsburg, West Virginia. Tanya, independent line. You're on with Senator Isakson.
Hello.
Hey, Tanya.
I was a Democrat for the last 24 years, and I've been following the Senate Finance Committee. And I'm appalled that they are more obsessed with penalties and taxes to punish the public for not buying a health care that is not even operational, won't be operational, and they want to put in penalties and possible a year in jail when they can't even keep child molesters in jail. They want to put people in jail for not buying mandatory health insurance, and then to take the disabled off of Medicare. I have 4 doctors. I should have 5. I'm a shut-in. And they want to take me off of Medicaid and put me on the exchange. For the first time, there's a man in Ohio I heard about today, Rick Naden, a communist. I'm ready to vote for a communist who will look after the people, not a Democrat, not a Republican.
Senator.
Well, democracy is the best way. Communism, I don't think, is the way to go on anything, number one. Number two, you have pointed out some of the real concerns with the Finance Committee markup, and those are some of the reasons there's going to be a lot of debate on the floor of the United States Senate.
In the Hill newspaper this morning is this article. Pelosi moves to center on public health options. Senator Pelosi is shifting to the center on a government-run public health insurance plan, warming to a version that is being supported by some blue dog Democrats.
You know, that's a wait and my response to be that is I'll wait and see. Right now we've done so many things that are conceptual and there's not a lot of meat on the bones, just like the co-op that's being proposed in the Senate Finance Bill. So, you know, moving to the center on something that's only conceptual is something I want to see the meat on the bones. I want to see the facts before I understand if that's just real or if that's rhetoric.
Next call comes from Erie, Pennsylvania. Laura, Republican.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi.
Good morning.
I have two specific questions for the senator. I first want to know if the terms that are in the current bill do include taking my tax dollars and funding abortions. I am a firm stance that abortion is the immoral killing of an unborn baby, and I would prefer living in jail than paying taxes to kill babies. I'm not going to cooperate in this immoral act.
And Laura, you had a second point?
The second point is there any truth? Rush Limbaugh is talking about the House and the Senate going together and sneaking this through on another bill. And if that's true, I think it's going to be complete chaos because the majority of Americans have already spoken. We don't want the public option. We don't want all the money that is going to be burdened to our grandchildren for this monstrosity.
Well, let me tell you the second question first. I don't think with the intensity on the health care debate you can sneak anything through. What he's probably referring to is the Senate option that is available to Harry Reid, which is the reconciliation vote, which avoids a cloture vote, allows the debate to be cut off, and makes the bill come to the floor limited only to 20 hours of debate. That's referred to lovingly as the nuclear option, and in the end, I just can't believe they'll pull that trigger. As far as abortion is concerned, I cannot address the Senate bill. The Senate Finance Committee bill. I'm not in that committee, so I don't know what their final language will be. I know in the Health Committee, which I am on, they did adopt an amendment in the Health Committee to not allow any tax dollars to go to fund abortions.
Senator Isakson, Senator Boxer, chairman of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, is our guest this week on our Newsmakers program. And she spoke about Republican support for the Kerry Boxer climate change bill. Here's what she had to say so we can get your reaction.
I don't know. The last vote, we had 54 people voting to move forward. We didn't get the 60. We had 54 people who voted or sent letters. They weren't there. And that was the Lieberman-Warner-Boxer proposal. That was the high water mark, 54, saying they wanted to go forward. The one before that was 37, Lieberman-McCain, and the one before that was McCain-Lieberman. I think it got a little more 40s, about that. So we're gaining ground. But at this point, I can't count to 60, like I can't on healthcare either yet. But you just do your job and you move forward. And I think the big difference is that this time, with this bill, which is the Kerry Boxer bill, there's a lot more support out in the country that's organized. And we have an administration that is helping, will help. And that makes a big difference. The last time we had an administration that was against us. So at this point, I can't report to you Republicans, but Senator Kerry and I have been talking to Republicans, and we're very hopeful.
Senator Isakson.
I can't count to 60 either on Kerry Boxer. I have spent a lot of time with Senator Kerry. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee. He is talking about doing a mark in foreign relations policy-wise on climate change, but I have not read the Kerry Boxer bill. But in the end, on the cap and trade approach to carbon, there are not 60 votes in the United States Senate.
You're on the Foreign Relations Committee also. Have you been following this kerfuffle between Senator Kerry and Senator DeMint over Honduras?
Yes.
What is the situation there?
Well, Senator DeMint is very intently concerned about our current policy, State Department policy, with regard to Zalawa, the former president who was ousted by the Supreme Court and the Parliament. He was wanted to take a trip to Honduras to investigate along with 3 members of Congress. And as I understand from this morning's paper, Senator Kerry, who has the authority to authorize trips, rejected his request for that trip today. And I believe, and I could stand to be corrected, it's because of two holes that exist on appointments that are pending before the committee. So that is basically Senate gymnastics, if you will. We're a quid pro quo type of a body, and if there's something out there that needs to get done, sometimes you have to leverage to get it done.
Next call for Senator Isakson, Dearborn, Michigan. Jeff, Democrat.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi.
Morning.
I have a comment and a question. I've been unemployed for a while, and the Democrats, you know, I've always been a Democrat, but, you know, they've already lost my vote now at this point. Because during the election and before the election, you know, Clinton and Obama said #1 priority, jobs, 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 and all we're doing is losing jobs. So my question to you, sir, is this. When you go to cast your ballot for the unemployment insurance extension, how are you going to vote, yes or no? That's all I've got. Thank you.
I appreciate the question, and I have generally supported extensions of unemployment compensation, and I always look at them objectively when they come up. When your country's in difficult times, it's important to try and take care of those who are struggling. On the same token, the best thing you can do for the unemployed is create more jobs, and the best way you can create more jobs is to have a true stimulus that promotes construction and economic development, not just paying salaries or make work. So the most important thing on unemployment is to make sure employment is more robust so you don't have to collect it. But on the question of unemployment insurance, as long as our needs are out there and we can afford it, it's important to take care of the uninsured, not the uninsured, but those who are unemployed.
9.8 is the national unemployment rate now. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Since the start of the recession in December '07, the number of unemployed persons has increased by 7.6 million to 15.1 million. Jules in Miami, Independent. You're on with Senator Isakson.
Yeah, I appreciate being on with the senator. I've been watching the debates going on. I'm a physician here in Miami. I've been practicing for a while. And many of our, my friends and the physicians are willing to come to the table to help provide the solutions, but we're not permitted to come to the table, and there's no interaction. Most of the debate is led by the people that run the insurance companies and the self-interest, and we see a growing administrative cost in health care, and those of us in primary, secondary care are not permitted to develop models that actually bring efficiency to the health care delivery system. I mean, eventually, there was a statistic that the cost of health care for people that use drugs, alcohol, tobacco is in the area of $280 billion. If this country moved to help people get off of these agents that create dependency and sickness, we would have a large saving and move into preventive health care in weight reduction, stopping smoking, and if we didn't use the drugs in the Western world, the Taliban and the Afghanistan, they rely 80% of their economy on heroin, there would be no market, and eventually they'd have to use useful, gainful employment to move the society forward.
All right, Doctor, let's leave it there. A lot to work with, Senator.
Doctor, your comments are right on target. First of all, thank you for your service to humanity. Second of all, you should be at the table. You know, one of the things that's been the problem that we've had on the Republican side of the aisle is really being at the table effectively to be a part of the debate. But on your key point of wellness and disease management, I can't tell the public out there how important your remarks are. Two American companies, Safeway Corporation and IBM, over the last 5 years have flattened the growth to almost zero in terms of their cost of health care because they've put in positive programs for wellness, positive programs for disease management, and positive incentives for people to get off of cigarettes or get off of alcohol. Those types of things are the great contributors to the rapid rise of cost in Medicare and the rapid rise of cost in health care. You are exactly right, Doctor.
Next call for the senator comes from Rome, Georgia. Rosemary, Republican.
Good morning. Your statement that the cost of living has gone down for Social Security recipients and therefore no COLA increases, I would like to give you some information about my grocery bill. It's gone up 20%. My medical premium insurance has gone up 10%. My medications have doubled. My property taxes have increased by 30%. That's all happened in the last 6 months. Therefore, what part of all that is my cost of living gone down?
Well, The Consumer Price Index is the index that the Social Security Administration indexes for its COLAs, and the Consumer Price Index in the last year went down. I understand there are components of all the costs that all of us have, insurance and things like that, that have gone up, but the measure for Social Security increases in terms of cost of living adjustments is the Consumer Price Index.
Johnny Isakson has had a long career in politics. He was in the Georgia House for about 13 years? 14 years, served as Republican leader for about 8 of those years, was in the Georgia Senate for a term or 2, and then on to the House of Representatives for 3 terms, and now in his first term as a U.S. Senator up for re-election in 2010, Denville, New Jersey. Darrell, Democrat.
Good morning.
Morning, Darrell.
Yeah, one comment and then a couple of questions. I'll make it quick. First of all, the only poll that I've seen where a majority of Americans don't want the public option was a Fox News Opinion Dynamics poll. I think it was like 51 to 49 in favor of a public option, which is probably why Bill O'Reilly has gotten on the bandwagon. But most polls show that most Americans want a public option. And I agree with the caller who said that health and wellness should be programs for health and wellness are important in bending the cost curve down. But I don't understand why we can't do these things concurrently. And finally, has anybody in the House and Senate on the Republican or Democratic side actually proposed a bill that would introduce tort reform and allowing people to buy insurance across state lines? And if so, what has CBO scored those proposals, and what was the CBO scoring in terms of bending the cost curve down?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me try and get all those, keep them in order mentally. Yes, there have been proposals on tort reform. In fact, there was a vote 3 years ago on the Senate floor on tort reform by capping non-economic pain and suffering damages, except for cases of gross negligence, to $500,000 for trauma surgeons and for OBGYNs, which are the 2 most expensive forms of medical malpractice. Those failed by very narrow margins. In the Senate Health Committee, there was an amendment put forward, I believe, by Lisa Murkowski on tort reform, which failed, to try and have some limitation and accountability in terms of runaway verdicts. And the second question has escaped me. You remember, Peter?
No, because I
apologize. Old age has taken over.
Double, right here. Here's a tweet that came in.
Oh, I know what it was, the score. And the question is, no, it has not been scored yet. In fact, the Senate Finance Committee bill, which is going to pass out next week, and they finished debate on last night, won't be scored for probably another 2 weeks. I'm sorry.
Sir, what is your opinion of the Medicare Part D that passed a few years ago?
I voted for Medicare Part D because Medicare Part D was a private sector solution to a significant problem. It energized insurance companies and providers to become competitive in providing insurance for pharmaceuticals to seniors on Medicare. It has resulted in seniors on Medicare, substantially all seniors on Medicare, having pharmaceutical drug coverage, which is one of the main things you can do, as the doctor mentioned earlier, on wellness. One of the biggest problems we have in Medicare is hypertension and diabetes, both of which are pharmaceutical dependent to manage their health, both of which it's important for them to have.
Last call, you got about 30 seconds. Dalton, Georgia. Gary.
Yes, was a Democrat, voted for Republicans many times, but I'm transitioning over to the Independent Party. Senator Isakson, I've written you a number of times. And my big point here is, for 9 months almost, our government has wasted, our Congress and our Senate has wasted so much time and so much money on one bill, and you can't seem to get anything done about it. I'm kind of tired of you wasting money. I'm kind of tired of you wasting time. And this is the reason. There are many other things that you could be handling. For example, you know me because I'm a disabled American veteran, and I have an appeal with the Veterans Administration that's been going on for 18 years now. And it's still not being handled, Senator. The letters I wrote to you, I never got anything, but we're passing it on to the VA. And the VA never answered any of my questions.
All right, we got the point, caller. Thank you. Mr. Isakson.
Well, thanks for contacting our office. I will speak to Lauren when I get back to Atlanta today and follow up. I'm sure you've gotten the responses. Sometimes you haven't gotten the answer that you wanted, but we try and stay on top of those. I'm on the Veterans Committee. You might know that Secretary Shinseki is doing a great job in streamlining the appeals process and review, which hopefully is going to bring about a quicker response, although 18 years is totally unacceptable. I'll just have to check the case to be sure, but we'll get on top of it, and I appreciate your call.
Senator Isakson, Republican of Georgia, thank you for being on the Washington Journal as always. About an hour to go. In half an hour, you'll be able to talk with Senator Mark Begich, freshman senator from Alaska, Democrat, and he'll come on and take the same types of calls that Senator Isakson did. In just a few minutes, we want to talk about President Obama being in Copenhagen for the Olympics, and we'll get to that after this news update from C-SPAN Radio.
It's 9:01 a.m. Eastern Time. As mentioned earlier, the unemployment rate rose to 9.8% in September, employers cutting more jobs than expected. The Labor Department says the economy lost more jobs than economists had expected, and in an hour, you can hear the Joint Economic Committee talk about these numbers with Keith Hall, the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The President and First Lady on their way home from Copenhagen after making remarks to the International Olympic Committee. President Obama is hoping he persuaded members of the IOC to award Chicago the 2016 Summer Olympic Games. Chicago competing with Madrid, Rio, and Tokyo for those games. That announcement coming from the IOC shortly. In Afghanistan, military officials say an American soldier has died in a grenade attack, and a British airman has been killed by a bomb in the south. A U.S. military spokeswoman says rocket-propelled grenades struck a patrol of American troops overnight, killing one soldier and wounding several others. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, intelligence officials say the al-Qaeda-linked leader of the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan is believed to have been killed by a U.S. missile strike in the northwest. The Taliban denies the claim. Those are some of the latest headlines on C-SPAN Radio.
Well, you've heard all the stories for the past week or so that President Obama